I sat there holding the papers, feeling like the room was spinning. Daniel kept talking, but his voice sounded far away, like I was underwater. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't even look at his face. I kept staring at the numbers, hoping they would change if I blinked enough times. They didn't. All I could think was, how did my life turn into this without me noticing? I asked him one simple question: why is my name on all of this? He sighed like I was the problem. He said it was normal for married couples, that it didn't mean anything, that it was just paperwork. The way he said it scared me more than the debt itself. There was no panic in his voice. No fear. Just annoyance that I was upset. I tried to remember when things started feeling off. Late nights. Phone calls he took in another room. The way he always brushed me away when I asked about money. He told me I didn't need to worry, that he had everything under control. I believed him because I loved him, and because trusting your husband feels natural. Now that trust felt stupid. I asked him what would happen next. He said we would figure it out together, but he didn't explain how. He talked in circles, using big words that didn't really mean anything. When I asked if we could talk to a lawyer or a financial advisor, his tone changed. He told me not to overreact and warned me not to make things worse by involving other people. That night, I couldn't sleep. Daniel fell asleep fast, like nothing had happened. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying our entire marriage in my head. I wondered how someone could sleep so peacefully after dropping something like that on the person they promised to protect. My chest felt heavy, and I realized I wasn't just scared, I was hurt in a way I had never felt before. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired, confused, and betrayed. I knew one thing for sure: whatever Daniel had done, he hadn't been honest with me. This wasn't a shared mistake. It was something he had chosen to do without my consent. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of him. Instead, I went quiet. That silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. I needed time to think, to understand, and to protect myself. I realized that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your entire future for their secrets. That was the day something inside me changed. I was still his wife, but I was no longer blind. The trust one gave so freely was gone, replaced by questions I refused to ignore. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing: I couldn't pretend this was okay. My marriage didn't just crack that day, it showed me a truth I could never unsee. When I started thinking back, the signs were always there. They were just small enough for me to ignore. Daniel was the one who first suggested we combine our money. He said it was what grown, stable couples did. He told me separate accounts created distance. I didn't want distance, so I agreed. After that, he slowly took control of everything. Bills, bank statements, taxes, he said he would handle it all so I wouldn't have to worry. He always told me I worked hard enough and deserved peace. When papers came in the mail, he opened them first. If I asked what they were, he said they were routine or boring. I trusted him because he spoke with confidence and never hesitated. Over time, he started asking me to sign things without explaining them. He would place documents in front of me while I was tired or distracted. Sometimes he said we were late on something and needed to act fast. Other times, he said it was just a formality. I didn't read closely because I believed my husband wouldn't hurt me. That belief became his advantage. There were other moments that didn't feel right. He took calls late at night and stepped outside to answer them. When I asked who it was, he said it was work. He went on short trips with little notice and came back stressed but quiet. I told myself every marriage has busy seasons. I didn't want to be the suspicious wife. What I didn't know was that he was taking out loans in our names. Some papers used my signature without my permission. Others were signed after he pressured me, using fear and urgency to rush me. He knew I hated conflict, and he used that. He also knew the system well enough to hide what he was doing behind complex terms and fine print. The more I learned, the clearer it became. This wasn't one bad decision. It was many careful steps taken over years. Each move was designed to keep me unaware and dependent. He counted on my trust and my silence. He built everything so that when the truth came out, I would feel trapped. Realizing this hurt more than the debt itself. I could handle numbers. I could face financial problems. What broke me was understanding that the person I trusted most had planned this without thinking about the damage it would do to me. He didn't trip and fall into this situation. He walked into it knowingly and pulled me along without asking. That was when I stopped blaming myself. I saw that my love had been used as a tool. My patience had been mistaken for permission. This wasn't carelessness. It was control. And once I understood that, I knew my marriage wasn't built on honesty anymore. It was built on secrets I never agreed to carry. When I finally confronted Daniel, I expected anger or regret. What I didn't expect was how calm he was. He didn't say sorry. He didn't even look ashamed. He leaned back in his chair and told me I was overreacting. He said debt was normal and that everyone was struggling because of the economy. Hearing him talk like that made my stomach turn. I asked him how he could make such huge decisions without telling me. He laughed softly and said we were married, so it didn't matter whose name was on the papers. He said couples share everything, including problems. When I told him I felt betrayed, he turned it around and said I was being dramatic and selfish. He accused me of not believing in him when he needed support the most. The conversation went in circles. Every time I tried to talk about how scared I felt, he talked about his stress instead. He made himself the victim and acted like I was making things worse by asking questions. He said the debt was temporary and that once his plans worked out, everything would be fine. But he couldn't explain when or how that would happen. Then he brought up my property. The house I inherited before we were married. He said refinancing it was the smartest move. He spoke as if it was already decided. When I hesitated, his tone changed. He reminded me that he was my husband and that marriage meant sacrifice. He said if I loved him, I wouldn't hesitate to help. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not loudly, but deeply. I realized he wasn't asking for help, he was demanding protection. He wasn't worried about losing me, only about losing his escape. He saw my security as a tool to fix his mess, not as something he needed to respect. Later that night, I watched him sleep again, peaceful and unaware of the damage he had caused. I sat alone, replaying his words in my head. Not once had he asked how I felt. Not once had he admitted he was wrong. Everything was about what I owed him as his wife. In that silence, the truth became clear. I had been a partner in name only. When things were good, I was his equal. When things fell apart, I was his shield. He never saw me as someone to protect, only as someone to use when the consequences caught up with him. That night, I stopped hoping he would change. I understood that love, in his eyes, came with conditions. And once I saw that, I knew I had to stop waiting for honesty that was never coming. After that night, I stopped asking Daniel questions. I knew he wouldn't tell me the truth anyway. Instead, I started looking for it myself. I waited until he left for work and went through the files he kept locked in his desk. At first, I felt guilty, like I was doing something wrong. But that feeling disappeared the moment I saw what was inside. The documents were more detailed than anything he had ever shown me. Loan statements, transfer records, and agreements with names I didn't recognize. As I kept reading, a pattern formed. The money wasn't used to build something stable or necessary. It was poured into private ventures that had already failed. Business ideas that never made real profit. Promises that collapsed quietly while the debt stayed alive. Then I found proof of a lifestyle he hid from me. Expensive short-term rentals in cities he claimed were work trips. Large withdrawals at casinos, marked clearly in the statements. Charges for things he never brought home or talked about. Each line felt like another lie added on top of the last. What hurt more was realizing how carefully it was hidden. Separate accounts under different names. Guarantees signed without my knowledge. Deals made for other people's businesses, where Daniel promised money we didn't have. He had tied our future to risks that were never discussed with me. The worst part came when I opened his email records. I wasn't even looking for them at first, but once I saw the messages, I couldn't stop. In those emails, Daniel talked about protecting himself if things went wrong. He wrote about making sure I would be legally responsible if the debts collapsed. He talked about timing and exposure, not once mentioning me as a person, only as coverage. Reading those words felt like being erased. This wasn't carelessness or bad luck. This was planning. He had thought through the damage and decided it was acceptable as long as he survived it. The man I trusted had prepared an exit that left me holding everything. By the time I closed the files, my hands were cold. I wasn't shaking anymore. I felt clear in a way I hadn't before. The confusion was gone. In its place was certainty. I finally understood that the betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about choice. He chose himself every time, even if it meant destroying me. That knowledge changed how I saw everything. The marriage, the arguments, the silence. None of it was accidental. I wasn't unlucky, I was deceived. And once I understood that, I knew I could never go back to pretending this was something we could simply talk through. After learning the truth, I didn't confront Daniel again. I understood that another argument would only give him more control. So I chose silence. Not the kind that comes from fear, but the kind that comes from clarity. I acted normal. I listened when he talked. I nodded when he made plans. On the outside, I looked cooperative. On the inside, I was watching everything carefully. I started keeping records. Copies of documents. Dates. Times. Conversations. I wrote things down while they were still fresh in my mind. I learned how much power information gives you when emotions are set aside. Daniel became careless because he thought I was broken and dependent. He didn't see me paying attention. I also reached out for help quietly. I met with a lawyer without telling him. Sitting in that office was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also the most important. I laid everything out honestly and waited for the worst. Instead, I learned something that changed everything. Some of the loans were not as solid as Daniel claimed. There were signs of fraud, pressure, and misrepresentation. That mattered more than I expected. For the first time, I felt like the ground under my feet wasn't completely gone. I wasn't trapped the way Daniel wanted me to believe. The law didn't see me as careless or greedy. It saw the details. It saw what I had been pulled into without full knowledge or consent. After that, I stopped crying. Not because the pain disappeared, but because tears no longer helped. I needed focus. I needed patience. I needed to think clearly for the first time in months. I realized this wasn't about hurting Daniel back. It wasn't about proving a point or winning an argument. This was about saving myself. About protecting what was left of my future. I understood that loud reactions would only give Daniel a chance to shift blame again. Quiet preparation was safer. Smarter. Stronger. At home, I continued to play my role. I didn't challenge him when he talked about plans or solutions. I let him believe I was dependent on his direction. That belief became my shield. The more comfortable he felt, the more he revealed without realizing it. I learned that silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it means you're choosing the right moment. I was done reacting. I was preparing. And for the first time since the envelope landed in my hands, I felt something close to control. As time passed, Daniel became more relaxed. He started acting like the problem was already solved. He spoke with confidence again, like he always did when he thought he was in control. He believed I had no options and nowhere to go. That belief made him careless. One evening, he told me there was one last step we needed to take. A final consolidation agreement, he said. He explained it would clean everything up and make life easier. He spoke fast and used the same confident tone, assuming I would agree like I always had before. He didn't ask how I felt. He told me what needed to be done. I didn't argue. I told him I understood and that I trusted his judgment. Saying those words felt strange, but I knew why I was doing it. He relaxed immediately. He saw my agreement as surrender. That was his mistake. Before signing anything, I asked for time to review the papers. I said I wanted to feel involved for once. He hesitated, but his confidence won. He believed I wouldn't understand the details anyway. He let me take the documents. The changes were small. So small that someone rushing wouldn't notice them. Certain responsibilities were clarified. Certain guarantees were made specific instead of shared. The language shifted just enough to place clear weight back where it belonged. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. Just precise. When I handed the papers back, Daniel barely glanced at them. He flipped through the pages, smiling like he had already won. He signed quickly and pushed them toward me. I signed too, calmly. No shaking hands. No hesitation. In that moment, I understood something important. His strength was never intelligence. It was confidence. And confidence without caution is dangerous. He believed I was trapped, so he stopped protecting himself. After that, his behavior changed again. He acted lighter, relieved. He talked about future plans, vacations, and starting over. I listened quietly. I didn't correct him. I didn't react. I just observed. Inside, I felt steady. Not excited. Not angry. Just steady. I realized patience had given me something panic never could. Time had allowed truth to settle into place. Daniel thought pressure would break me. Instead, it revealed him. The more he pushed, the clearer his blind spots became. He underestimated silence. He underestimated preparation. And most of all, he underestimated me. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't trying to fix everything at once. I was letting him walk forward confidently, unaware that the ground beneath him had changed. For the first time, the power balance shifted. He didn't notice it. But I did. And that made all the difference. The change didn't happen all at once. It started quietly, with phone calls Daniel didn't expect. Letters arrived that he tried to hide but couldn't explain away. People started asking questions he didn't have answers for. The confidence he once carried began to crack. When the creditors looked closer, they noticed things that didn't add up. Dates. Signatures. Agreements that didn't match the stories Daniel had told. I could see the fear growing in him. He started pacing more. Sleeping less. Checking his phone constantly. The calm man who thought he had everything under control was disappearing. That was when I took my next step. I formally separated our finances. I filed the paperwork without drama or announcement. I also moved forward legally, using facts instead of emotion. Fraud doesn't need shouting to be proven. It only needs truth. When Daniel found out, he was shocked. He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. He asked how I could do this to him. He said I was ruining his life. I reminded him quietly that I was protecting mine. First, he begged. He said we could fix everything together if I stopped the process. He promised change, honesty, and a fresh start. I listened without responding. I had heard promises before, and they had cost me enough. When begging didn't work, anger followed. He accused me of betrayal. He said I was heartless and disloyal. He tried to scare me with worst-case outcomes. His words were sharp, meant to shake my resolve. They didn't. Finally, he became the victim. He told anyone who would listen that he was overwhelmed and misunderstood. That he made mistakes and needed support, not consequences. I didn't argue with his version of events. I didn't need to. The truth was already moving on its own. Through it all, I stayed focused. I followed advice. I met deadlines. I documented everything. I didn't let his emotional swings pull me back into chaos. Each reaction he had only confirmed what I already knew. Watching the collapse was painful, but it was also clear. This was the result of choices made over years, not a single moment. Daniel had built his life on avoidance and assumption. Once those disappeared, there was nothing left to hold it up. He never believed I would stand up to him. He thought fear would keep me in place. When that fear turned into action, he didn't know how to respond. By the time he realized I wasn't backing down, it was already too late. The story was no longer in his control. And for the first time, neither was I. Walking into the courtroom felt unreal. The room was quiet, serious, and heavy with meaning. I didn't look at Daniel at first. I kept my eyes forward and reminded myself why I was there. This wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about truth. When the case began, I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for me. Each paper had a date. Each agreement had a timeline. Each signature told its own story. There was no need for dramatic words or emotional speeches. Facts don't raise their voice. They just exist. Daniel tried to explain himself. He talked about pressure, bad timing, and misunderstandings. He painted himself as someone who meant well but failed. I stayed quiet and let the record stand as it was. The difference between our positions became clear without me saying a word. As the judge reviewed the evidence, I watched Daniel's confidence disappear again. His shoulders dropped. His voice lost strength. The story he had built over years started to fall apart in front of him. This time, there was nowhere to hide it. The ruling came calmly, without drama. Large portions of the debt were ruled invalid for me. Responsibility was redirected where it legally belonged. The decision wasn't emotional. It was precise. It followed the trail Daniel had created himself. I felt relief, but not joy. Winning didn't feel like celebration. It felt like weight being lifted slowly, piece by piece. I had spent so long carrying fear that I almost forgot what calm felt like. Daniel didn't look at me when the decision was read. He stared at the floor, frozen. In that moment, I understood something important. Control doesn't disappear loudly. It fades when the truth becomes visible. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I didn't say anything to him. Silence felt right. Not because I had nothing to say, but because everything that needed to be said had already been proven. As I walked out of the courtroom, I realized I wasn't walking away angry. I was walking away clear. The story he tried to shape for years no longer belonged to him. What mattered wasn't that he lost. What mattered was that I was free from something that was never mine to carry. And for the first time in a long while, the future felt like something I could face without fear. After the court ruling, Daniel's world began to unravel. His business partners lost trust in him. Deals he once controlled fell apart. Banks became cautious, and creditors demanded answers he couldn't provide. Every step he had taken to protect himself now exposed him, and the control he had so carefully maintained slipped away. Our marriage ended quietly. There were no yelling matches or dramatic confrontations. He left the house, and I stayed. Legally, I was safe. My name was clear of debt, my assets protected. But safety didn't erase the emptiness I felt. I realized that while the financial burden was gone, the emotional weight of betrayal remained. I mourned the version of love I thought I had. I remembered the early days, Daniel's laughter, the promises, the plans for the future. That part of my life was real, and it hurt to let it go. Betrayal doesn't erase memories, it just stains them. Every smile we shared now felt complicated, tainted by what came after. At the same time, I felt relief. Relief that I didn't allow his lies and manipulation to dictate the rest of my life. Relief that I had learned to recognize deceit, to protect myself, and to act instead of just reacting. I understood that surviving betrayal wasn't just about being legally free, it was about reclaiming my own sense of strength. Daniel tried, in small ways, to regain control. He sent messages, suggested meetings, even implied regret. I didn't respond. I realized that responding would only give him a chance to manipulate the narrative again. Silence, as I had learned before, was a powerful shield. I focused on rebuilding my life. I reorganized my finances, planned for the future, and surrounded myself with people who truly supported me. I learned to enjoy small victories again, simple peace in my home, quiet mornings, and the ability to make decisions without fear. Even though the betrayal left scars, I didn't let it define me. I carried the lessons with me instead. I learned patience, vigilance, and self-respect. I learned that trust is precious, but so is self-protection. And I learned that walking away from a life built on lies sometimes becomes the strongest choice a person can make. In the end, Daniel lost more than money. He lost credibility, stability, and a marriage he once thought unshakable. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I only celebrated my freedom. I mourned the love that had been, but I also welcomed the life I could now live on my own terms. For the first time in years, I felt the possibility of peace, and with it, the quiet strength to move forward. After the divorce was finalized, life felt different in a way I hadn't expected. The house was quiet, the bills were mine alone, and every decision I made was for me. At first, it was strange to feel this much control over my own life. For years, I had allowed Daniel's choices to shape my world. Now, that world belonged entirely to me. I took time to rebuild slowly. I organized my finances, made plans for my future, and focused on stability. I didn't rush. I didn't force happiness or try to fill the emptiness with distractions. I learned that independence wasn't just about money or property, it was about knowing I could stand on my own, without needing anyone to protect me. Keeping my dignity mattered more than anything else. I refused to let anger or revenge dictate my actions. I didn't need to humiliate Daniel or relive the betrayal for others to see. My peace was private. My strength was quiet but firm. Every day, I reminded myself that surviving the worst didn't have to leave me bitter, it could leave me wiser. The debt no longer followed me. It was gone, legally and practically. But the lesson stayed with me, sharper than any number on a paper. I understood now that love without honesty is dangerous, no matter how kind the person seems. Trust without boundaries is a trap that can cost more than money. I would never ignore that lesson again. I focused on what I wanted from life. Simple things at first, stability, calm mornings, choices made freely. Later, bigger goals, travel, career growth, and rebuilding connections that mattered. Each step was mine, guided by experience rather than fear. I discovered that power isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and consistent. It comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take it from you. I didn't dwell on what Daniel lost. I didn't obsess over his mistakes. My attention was on myself, my health, my peace, and my future. The betrayal had been painful, but it didn't define me. What defined me was how I chose to respond, how I refused to let deceit control the rest of my life. In the end, walking away wasn't about escape. It was about choice. Choosing myself, my well-being, and my dignity. Choosing to live life without fear, without manipulation, and without regret. The past remained a part of my story, but it no longer dictated my path. I felt a quiet strength settle inside me. I was free, not just from debt or lies, but from the weight of betrayal. I had survived, learned, and grown. And for the first time in years, I felt the kind of peace that comes from knowing you can trust yourself more than anyone else. That peace, that strength, became my new life.